Thank you to the museum for inviting me here today, and thank you for tuning into Facebook Live. My name is Kitty Loewy. I'm the daughter of a Holocaust survivor. I'm so honored to be here today and grateful. In 2014, I had an adult b'nai mitzvah, and I was struggling with articulating the personal meaning of my Devar Torah that had to do with the Israelites traveling in the wilderness to find the promised land. The promised land. And as I began to think about traveling in the wilderness, I knew I wanted to talk about my parents at my mitzvah. And after I was invited to become a member of the second generation class here at the museum, I crafted a fuller version of their story. I honor my parents today and all survivors who found life after seeing the worst in humankind. We're all on a journey. Isn't that what life is? With twists and turns and unexpected stops along the way. We are all travelers. Sometimes we think we're going in one direction, only to find ourselves going in another. This is the story of the journey of my parents. My dad, Karl Lowy, or Charles, as he preferred, was a young man in Vienna, Austria in the 1930s. Born in 1919 as the only child to Arpad and Barbara Cohn Lowy, he was your typical kid. He skied, he played soccer, he was a terrific swimmer. He had a bar mitzvah, he attended high school, and he planned to attend university and hopefully study engineering. Now, I can't tell you too much about my Viennese grandmother, Barbara. I know she had several sisters whom my dad had a deep fondness for, along with many cousins. My grandfather, Arpad, was originally from Czechoslovakia. He served in the Austro-Hungarian military and worked in the garment industry. Always the dapper looking man, as I recall, he and Barbara married in their late 20s. The birthplace of my dad, Vienna, at the turn of the 20th century, was a bustling city of 2 million people. It was the birthplace of the great composers Mozart and Schubert. It was the home of Sigmund Freud and was considered a world leader in science, philosophy, and research. Plus, it was a melting pot of immigrants from across the empire. But things began to turn in the 1930s. The entry of Hitler's army into Austria in March 1938 triggered terrible suffering and hardship for Vienna's Jews. Home to 180,000 Jews, men and women were grabbed at random by Nazis and jailed for no reason, while police turned a blind eye to the looting of Jewish homes and businesses. The occupation of Austria, known as the Anschluss, reached its peak over 2 days in 1938, when Kristallnacht, Night of Broken Glass, saw the Nazis destroy every synagogue in Vienna and arrest 6,000 citizens. Most of those arrested would be sent to Dachau. Jews were gradually robbed of their freedoms. They were blocked from almost all professions. They were shut out of schools and universities and were forced to wear the yellow badge that identified them as a Jew. Well, a knock on the door one day changed everything for my dad's family. A member of the police told my dad and grandfather to leave the city. They were given just a couple of days to vacate. No longer considered a rightful citizen of the city that he loved, my 18-year-old dad left his mom behind, who told him that things would soon be over and the women and children would be safe. And he set out on an unexpected, unknown journey. Sarah Miriam Kweskin was born on the north side of Chicago in 1919. The child of Polish-born Taba Kesselman and Lithuanian-born Jack Kweskin, life was not easy for Sarah and her younger brother, Sam. The family struggled financially, and the passing of her father in 1933, when Sarah was just 14, left the family in deep, deep debt. Foregoing her education, Sarah dropped out of Roosevelt High School to go to work for an uncle. She would live at her Chicago home with her mother until she was 27, when her journey would bring her to an unexpected place. Well, after that fateful knock on the door in 1938, Charles set off with a friend, hoping to get to neutral Switzerland, where they felt they could be safe. At one point, after several days of travel through unfamiliar towns and villages and sleeping in barns and forests to avoid being caught, my dad's friend demanded that they travel in a new direction. My father resisted, knowing that his friend was scared and tired and frustrated. I mean, who wouldn't be? The next morning, upon awakening, his friend had abandoned him and stolen the few items my dad had taken on his trip. Eventually, using his own wiles, my dad made it to Switzerland, and he found work in camps that were set up by the Swiss government. The friend never heard from again. There you see my dad underneath the blue arrow. The Swiss camps paid the Jewish workers a pittance for backbreaking work. The men were used to clear the roads, chop down trees, and help local farmers. But they weren't incarcerated. He was able to come and go as he pleased. A few years ago, I asked the Illinois Holocaust Museum, this museum, to translate a diary of my dad's. What I found was eye-opening. I'll be reading excerpts throughout this presentation. Here's one from April 1st, 1940. Charles was now 20 years old. He says, "First day at the work site. I think you can tell from my handwriting, the work is difficult, extremely difficult. A few days ago, part of the forest was so destroyed by a storm that the pine trees snapped like matches. Our job is to remove the soil from the roots so that the foremen are able to saw through the trunk without getting their blades caught. Of course, I feel completely exhausted, but I'm starting to work on my plans to emigrate to Brazil. I hope it works out. I'm too tired to think right now." As I read my dad's diary, I can feel the worry, the confusion, and fear in his words. May 10th, 1940. The Germans marched into Holland and Belgium. Switzerland has mobilized for battle. We found this out this afternoon and left the work site in an organized fashion. People are tense. We heard that bombs were dropped in the Jura Mountains. We're expecting internment. What's going on with Papa? I'm pretty nervous. I hope he's with the French. To make matters worse, our radio isn't working. I'll write more later. It turned out that his dad was being detained in a camp in the region of France known as Vichy. Vichy was established after France surrendered to Germany in June of 1940. Thousands of prisoners were detained there. Charles writes, "Personally, I'm completely wiped out. This is probably the most difficult work I've ever done in my whole life. The future prospects look so dim that it's best not even to think about it. The biggest battle of the war thus far has been raging since yesterday on the Western Front. The German army is attacking with 1.5 million and 3,000 tanks. The French are retreating. Paris and Berlin have been bombed. The complete occupation of France is expected. I received some mail from Papa. He's in a camp in the south of France. The Japanese are continuing their killing in China." And Charles writes this in mid-July. "After a long while, I finally received a letter from Papa again. The tone of the letter was so depressing that now I too feel down. Papa's in a camp with thousands of other refugees and had to write this letter standing up, since that's all the space he had. He's asking me to do everything possible to get him out of the camp. I'm going to Zurich tomorrow and will do everything I can." Finally, late summer 1940, my dad receives news that the American Jewish Joint Distribution Commission has arranged for a group of refugees to immigrate to the Dominican Republic, a primitive, undeveloped jungle island in the Caribbean. In late July, Charles writes, "I've decided to go to Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic. What awaits me and my compatriots there is a mystery. But one thing is clear. I have to say adieu to Europe and my parents. I'm worried about how Papa's going to take the news. But if my immigration goes well, I might be able to bring Mama and Papa over. I'm doing everything I can to get out of this camp. The ship leaves on August 19th. However, all sorts of things can happen between then and now." A little background on the Dominican Republic. You should know that in 1938, 32 leaders of countries from around the world held a special meeting in Evian, France, to figure out what to do with the Jews that were trying to leave Europe. Most of these countries, including the US, decided that they did not want immigrants coming to their country. They were sympathetic to the Jews, but they didn't want to welcome them, except for one man who was the president of the Dominican Republic. His name was Rafael Trujillo, and he said that 100,000 Jews were welcome to come to his country. Now, Trujillo was a brutal dictator who murdered his own countrymen. He's accused of being responsible for up to 67,000 deaths. It's said that the only reason he invited the Jews to enter the country was to whiten the population. His hope was that the Jews and the natives would intermarry. Trujillo was president from 1930 until 1961, when he was assassinated. Well, from Switzerland, Charles traveled through France, where he was able to visit his father, and then on to Lisbon. And while in Lisbon, he received this postcard from his mother. Barbara writes to her son on October 17, 1940. "My very dear child, I hope these few lines reach you. Stay healthy and optimistic. Trust yourself and don't let things annoy you. Maybe you'll be with him soon. Stay brave and strong and know that your mother is thinking of you often. Safe travels. Love, Mom." A few months later, on March 12, 1941, Barbara and about 1,000 other Viennese Jews were sent to the Opatow ghetto in Poland. We know this because the International Tracing Service helped us track down the transit information. The Germans were very good at keeping records. Conditions in the ghetto were, of course, very difficult. My grandmother Barbara was already an older woman at this point. She was in her 50s, and we don't know if she survived the camp or died in Treblinka, a death camp that was the end of the road for anyone on that March transport. We will assume that her sisters and nieces and nephews perished as well. A few weeks later, on November 12, 1940, my dad boarded a boat called the Guinée, which first made a stop at Ellis Island. My dad had gotten ill while on the trip, and they wouldn't let him finish his trip to the DR, so he had to disembark on Ellis Island for medical care. Here's what he said about life at Ellis Island. "Ellis Island is a comfortable prison. You stay in a huge hall during the day. There are tables and armchairs for us to sit in and clothes racks for our luggage. At the moment, there are about 100 people here. Some are Jews, mainly refugees from Poland and Germany, who were driven from their homes by a crazy man, young and old, a movie magnate from Paris, no more important than a salesman from Germany. Some have been here for 3 or 4 months, and they're waiting to see if they can emigrate. Men and women sleep in separate dorms. Life here reminds me of being in the camp in Switzerland, but under much better conditions. There's plenty of food, and it's good." Well, after 2 weeks at Ellis Island, he was able to set sail on another ship, which took him first to Puerto Rico and then on to the Dominican Republic. The Dominican Republic welcome the Jews on the condition that they become agricultural workers, farmers, basically. The Joint Distribution Committee created a special organization called the Dominican Republic Settlement Association, DORSA. And then they funded it to purchase 26,000 acres in the Dominican town of Sosua, which had previously been developed as a banana plantation, but then was abandoned by the United Fruit Company. Upon arrival, every new Jewish settler was given several acres of land, cows, a mule, and a horse. There's my dad riding. The Dominican Republic Settlement Association brought in agricultural specialists from Palestine and trained the refugees to farm. Many Jews became experts in dairy production and cheese making, but the program ended in 1941 when no one was able to travel due to Nazi restrictions. In the end, less than 700 Jews would find freedom in the DR. My dad was lucky to be one of them. My grandfather, Arpad, survived the French work camps. He was also able to make it to the Dominican Republic and then on to the US in 1946. Another journey. But let's get back to Sarah Queskin, the Chicago girl. She was now Sally, as she decided Sarah did not suit her. Her mother, Tauba, or Tilly, as I knew her, was at heart a matchmaker. And she was also concerned about her daughter's marriageability. One day, probably in late 1947, while shopping at a dress store in Chicago, she happened upon a dapper-looking man, and she started a conversation about their children. It probably went something like this. Tilly, I have an unmarried daughter. She's 27. Oi. Arpad, the dapper-looking seller of women's clothes, probably responded, well, here's the address of my son. Maybe they can write to each other. I'm sure they have much in common. And so Sally began a pen pal relationship with a refugee in the jungle of the DR, and thus began the start of a new journey. What they wrote about, what she told him about her life, what he told her about his, can only be imagined. I wish I had those letters. So Sally, deciding to throw caution to the wind, made arrangements to fly to the Dominican Republic to meet this man, this stranger in a strange land. Can you imagine? This was 1948. On February 1st, she took the longest trip of her life. And then on February 14th, in a Spanish language ceremony, she said, sí, when asked if she took this man in matrimony. My mom would tell me how during that ceremony, she had no idea what the Spanish officiant was saying, only that my dad elbowed her every time she needed to say sí. My mom left the Dominican Republic 6 weeks later. My dad was able to leave that summer. They settled in Chicago in the summer of 1948 and bore a son the following year, my brother Jack, and I came along a few years later. My parents were married for 51 years. My dad passed in 1999 and my mom in 2012. Isn't it funny where your journey can take you? The story of the 700 survivors is a little known one. Think of what those European refugees must have thought when they landed in the Caribbean. It was for sure the promised land. They created lives for themselves by learning to farm the jungle, build homes, celebrate the high holidays, find freedom, and leave a legacy that I am proud to be a part of. 2 years ago, we were honored to be asked to be part of this museum's wonderful exhibit called Stories of Survival, which showcased survivors of many different conflicts around the globe. We created a poster with the handprints of 9 of the great-grandchildren of Charles and Sally that, of course, showcases their legacy. Now 11 great-grandchildren later, and soon to be 13 great-grandchildren later, we know they would be very happy to see the family flourish. Now, I did a little research on the DR to bring you up to date on what is there today. According to Wikipedia, 3,000 Jews reside in both the capital, Santo Domingo, and in Sosua. There are 3 synagogues there, including a Chabad. The Chabad Outreach Center focuses on assisting the local Jewish population reconnect with their Jewish roots, and it's a source for traditional Judaism in the Dominican Republic. In Sosua, there's a small Jewish museum next to the synagogue. On the high holidays, the Sosua community hires a cantor from abroad who comes to lead services. The survivors of the war who lived in the DR in the 1940s used to hold reunions. I remember my dad attending in 1990. They just love seeing their old friends. I have a few extra slides here. This next one is a picture of a custom slip that declares what my dad brought into this country. This was July 3rd, 1948, when he was finally able to enter. If you look closely, you can see he brought in 480 cigarettes, but I see no declaration of a wife. The next slide is a letter from DORSA, that's the Dominican organization, that acknowledges my dad's expertise in agriculture. It's dated 1944, and it appears to be a reference letter, perhaps for another position that he was looking for in the DR. This next slide is an interview that my mom and dad did in 1986 for the Sun Sentinel newspaper in Florida. Several years ago, the Jewish Heritage Museum in New York had an exhibit called Dominican Haven. And this is the book that was created to go with the exhibit. The couple farming there on the cover were Jews from Berlin who came to the DR in 1940. Rosa and Heinz Lesser had recently sent their 3 young children, ages 3, 6, and 9, on the Kinder transport to Sweden. In this picture, Rosa is 28, Heinz is 31. They would not see their children again for 10 years. And the incredible thing about this picture is that I'm close friends with their granddaughter. Their mother was one of the children on the Kinder transport. May their memories be a blessing, along with all the ones we lost from the war. Thank you. If there are any questions, I would be more than happy to answer them.
Thank you so much. We do have a couple questions. One, you just mentioned the book and being friends with the granddaughter of so how did that come about? How did you meet them?
So the family of the couple farming became friends with my dad while in the Dominican Republic, and they all eventually settled in Chicago. My dad continued a relationship with him, and we kind of grew up together, and so I remained friends with their daughter, and we all lived in the same neighborhood, and so she and I talk very often about our parents' lives in the Dominican Republic. There's not that many of us, so it's kind of nice to have somebody to be that close to who has, you know, a similar connection.
That's awesome. What was it like having the diary translated and going through that process?
So the museums very kindly did that for us, and I was so grateful. But I think that the emotions that it stirred up were very profound for me, to see my dad's handwriting as a teenager, contemplating his life and where it might take him. And while he was writing that diary, he had no idea what was happening with his mother. So he's naive as to what had happened. And of course, she was being shipped off. So there's a lot of emotion connected to holding that diary and knowing that it's my dad as a kid.
When did you first learn their stories? When did they share it with you and kind of go through that?
I think probably like a lot of children of survivors, you hear things growing up, but because you're a kid, you don't question a lot of it. You don't, maybe it's because of lack of maturity that you're not interested. It's just sort of how you grow up, and you knew that your dad came from this country and your mom met him in that country, and it just was the way it was. I think it wasn't until I was much older and maybe a little wiser that I started to dig a little deeper into their background and was able to piece all of this together with the help of the museum. So I'm grateful for that.
And how and why did you get involved with the museum, and when did that all start?
Well, I feel a connection to the museum because of my background, and I was actually asked to participate in training to become a second generation speaker. And at first I thought, nah, I can't put together the story of their life. But as I dug deeper and learned more and discovered more, and with the help of my son, Zach, who does some work regarding ancestry and genealogy, it was easier to put together some of this stuff. And, you know, you have to also make assumptions about things too, about what his life was and how he traveled and what he was thinking, because you don't have everything. There's still a lot of unanswered questions that you know, sadly, when you're a kid, you don't ask all the right questions. You only want to know them when you're older. So.
Are there any, for people who want to learn more about the Holocaust and stuff, are there any books or films or anything that you would recommend people look into?
Regarding the Dominican Republic, if you do a Google search about Sosua or the Dominican Republic and Jews, or Dominican Haven, which was the book that was shown on my slide, you will definitely learn about it. It's one of those little known stories. I mean, there were only 700 people that were saved. And I say only, I mean, it was a blessing. But it's also, there's a lot of irony that Trujillo saved these people, even though he was such an awful person. So it's, I don't want to say it's a curse, it's a blessing, but you have to understand the history of him and what he is. So the Jews ended up lucky. Nobody else wanted to take them in. So they were fortunate to find this island, this jungle island nation that, you know, became their home. So my dad was there for many, many years, and, you know, his tastes in food, I thought was, you know, were really unusual. As a kid growing up, you know, he was eating tropical fruits and avocado and things that, you know, we weren't familiar with, but those were the things that he dined on in the Caribbean.
Brilliant. Last question that I'm seeing, what kind of message or almost lesson do you want people to take from hearing your family's story?
Well, I mean, there's 8 million stories out there. Every one of them is different. I think that people were, I don't want to say lucky. There's so many stories about survival out there, and I just feel blessed that I'm here because he was able to make it. I think that's the real story here, is that the legacy that was created was because he was fortunate to survive where so many were not. But there are so many smaller stories connected to survival regarding the Holocaust. This is just one of them. So I'm grateful to be able to present this today. I think that most people didn't know about it. So.
Yeah, it's actually new to me as well. So
yeah,
it's nice to hear a different one. But,
yeah, but there is a lot of information online if anyone wants to look it up.
That is all the questions I have right now.
Okay, I have a little outro and then I can throw it back to you. Or first of all, I want to thank everyone for tuning in today. As I said earlier, I'm grateful to the museum, and I'm honored that people tuned in to listen today. Join us here next Wednesday, December 30th at 10 o'clock in the morning to hear second generation speakers Ron and Steve Koppel share their parents' story of survival. Please keep an eye on the Illinois Holocaust Museum's Facebook and other social media accounts, where we will post a stream of content throughout the weeks ahead. Thank you for your support during these extraordinary times. I hope everybody stays safe and has a happy and especially healthy new year, and let's all have a better 2021. Thank you.